everyone, and welcome back to the She Shoot podcast, Women Empowering Women in the Shooting Community, Season 2, Episode 17, Ian Runkle. Today's episode will be covering the theme of professional slash career. My name is Regina Ruiz Ordonez, and I'm from the Canadian University Shooting Federation. Joining me today, as always, are my co-hosts Denise Tomlin and Casey Gavinchuk from Lady Guns, and Kaylee Melanson from Maple Seed Project, Sunfire Radio, and CCFR Women's Program. I would like to start by thanking our sponsors, Cabela's Canada Outdoor Fund, positively shaping the future of the outdoors. Every cent donated by rounding up at checkout goes towards helping Canadian organizations just like ours. Savage Arms, home to the Stevens single-shot rifles and shotguns. Beretta, family owned and operated since 1526. Vortex, the best in optics, and Canada First Ammo. If you have any questions or comments throughout the show, make sure to leave them in the chat box below. Doing so will automatically enter you in the draw for today's giveaways. Today, I believe we have a She Shoots t-shirt and a Canada First Ammo prize pack. And Denise's gun, so she'll confirm later, I'm sure.
There's a storm happening where she is. So
yeah, exactly. So we got Kelly, we got Casey, and of course we got Ian. So here we go. We got the new bag.
And we're back.
Yeah, and then just before I hand it over to the ladies, I just want to say we're sorry for missing last month's episode, but we're happy to be back, and it's going to be a good one. So Denina and Kelly, so over to you guys.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I had to jump off. I had no audio, and I couldn't hear what was going on.
And we're frozen again. So there is storms happening in the Calgary area. So Deneen, I think that's a lovely facial feature. She'll jump on at some point here when she can actually unfreeze herself. But how about this? We'll switch places. There you are again. I was just going to get into the biography.
I know. And did it catch me in one of those really awkward, weird facial moments too?
It absolutely did.
Yeah.
Awesome. Love that. That. All right. I better talk fast. Get this introduction done. Ian Runkle, welcome. Criminal defense lawyer. So Ian Runkle is a Canadian criminal defense lawyer with a special interest in firearms and weapons law. He has taught classes on the subject at the University of Alberta and is a respected voice on these issues. Prior to his legal career, Ian received a BA in psychology from Simon Fraser University and then received his LLB from the University of Alberta. Ian is not just a lawyer, he's also a firearms owner. He is a competitive shooter and appreciates all the various shooting disciplines. And finally, Ian is a YouTuber with over 219,000 subscribers, and you can find his content under Runkle of the Bailey. And if we do a good job tonight, maybe you'll hit 219,000 in a couple more. So welcome to the show, Ian. And Kelly and I got a bunch of questions for you tonight. So it's best that we get started. So Kelly, over to you.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say thank you very much, first of all, before we get started into the questions. Ian and I spent some time together this past weekend at the AGM for the CCFR. So it's actually fantastic. We were talking about it. We had been on several podcasts together, but we never met in person. So it was finally good to meet you in person.
Likewise.
Yeah. So, but let's tell everybody about yourself. Why don't you tell us about how you got started in guns, because it's an interesting story, and then we can get into why you became a lawyer. I think it's a little bit of chicken and egg thing, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into guns?
Fair enough. So I was in law school, and law school is a very stressful place, and basically you've got more things to do than you've ever got time for, but you also need some way to take your mind off of things, just to get your head out of it and to sort of stay human. So I was figuring I need a hobby, and I need something that isn't just playing video games. I need to do something that is more useful. So I remembered I'd gone plinking a few times as a kid, and I remembered I enjoyed it. So I said, hey, I'll try that out. And so I went and got my firearms license, and I got a CZ 452 was the first gun I bought. Bolt action 22 caliber rifle. Still got it. It's a great gun. And but then I thought, I really need to make sure I don't get myself in trouble because there's so many gun laws. And I thought, well, it can't be that bad. I'll just, do some research on this and, maybe spend an afternoon, figure out all the things that I need to know. And then off we go. And the more I read, the more I went,
Yeah, it was horrible, wasn't it?
Well, I was thinking, this makes no sense. I must be awful at this because none of this makes any sense. And surely our laws aren't this crazy. And then the more I read, I went, oh, nope, these are just straight up crazy laws. So I basically, that's sort of how I came to doing firearms law, was just that it was such an interesting area in terms of the things that were wrong with it.
Yeah.
And also it had a tremendous potential. I just saw that there was so many people who are, just sort of people with day-to-day lives who haven't sort of devoted themselves to criminality, if that makes sense, who get caught up in this. People who get caught up in it by accident without realizing that they're doing anything wrong. So I thought, this is a place where people need help. So
yeah,
that's sort of the story of firearms law on my end.
Let's back up the bus a little bit. Why did you want to become a lawyer in the first place?
Well, I actually started out in psychology, and I've got attention deficit. So I was kind of fumbling along, not having figured any of that out, right? Not having really figured out how to manage that. So I ended up in I was sort of trying to figure out where I was going to end up. And one of my profs actually suggested, hey, have you thought about grad school? And at the time, my marks were not great. So I was like, I don't think that's possible. And she was like, well, if you've got somebody who's really pitching for you, then, there's a lot of flexibility there. Okay. And upon clarifying sort of where my marks were, she was like, oh, have you considered law school? And I thought, that makes no sense. Like, my marks aren't, are not good enough to get into psych grad school. How does that work for law school? But the LSAT is a huge factor to that. And I was able to do really well on that. And I did much better in law school than I ever did in my undergrad. And that's partly because I really enjoyed law school, which I know makes me weird, but I still did. So that's kind of how I got into law in general. And I'd always had an interest when I was taking psych classes. I was taking sort of forensic psych classes, which is basically anything psychology connected to the law. Any courses they had for that were available, I was jumping on those. So that's kind of where that, sort of how that came to be.
Okay. So why don't we talk a little bit about C21? What exactly is it? Because that's one of the main reasons why you're on tonight. So for those that don't know what it is or have been living under a rock for the last year, why don't you give us a little bit of information about what exactly is C21?
So C21 is the Liberals' ever-expanding gun bill. Every time they sort of figure out something new they want to add to it, they throw it in there. So it's got all sorts of different things in there that, it started out sort of focusing on reworking licensing and putting in red flag laws, which are basically going to be swatting laws, but that's another sort of whole thing there. And now they've added in, they want to put in all sorts of other restrictions. They put in what they call an assault rifle ban, but it's really just a ban on the guns everyone uses. So, it's basically a sporting rifle ban. So that's going to be very, very bad for the gun community.
Yeah.
So it's there's going to be a lot of shooting sports that are just utterly destroyed by this.
Hugely
And-
impacted by it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, just not just hugely impacted, but just straight up destroyed.
Destroyed. Yeah.
Like, just you're not going to be able to do things like if you're out there right now watching this, and you watch a video on cowboy action shooting, and you think, "Man, I'd love to do that. That looks amazing." If you're not already equipped for it, you will never be able to do it. That's their goal.
Right. So a lot of people think it's just a handgun ban. There's nothing else attached to it. And when it was actually proposed by the Liberal government, they said it's going to be a handgun ban. That's it.
I mean, they've put so many other things in there. And a lot of these provisions are just kind of terrifying. Some of these provisions are like one of the provisions will ban anybody who's ever had a domestic violence conviction, which sounds like a good thing.
Mhm.
Except that the court already had the ability to ban somebody who had a domestic violence conviction. It just wasn't, required. And so there were a number of circumstances where the court would say this isn't actually called for, because either the incident itself wasn't sufficiently serious, or various other things. And keep in mind, domestic violence can be everything from really serious, ugly incidents to a push. And, so you may actually have situations where there's a domestic dispute and it results in what we might call sort of lower end violence.
Okay.
But the partner may want to stay in that relationship. That's very common. And it may not be a repeated thing. It may just be a one-off that happens. But may, for instance, really want their spouse to be able to continue to hunt. Because that might be important to the family. And so this might actually, in some cases, discourage reporting, because if you're somebody who needs, if you're somebody who hunts culturally, or somebody who hunts for sustenance, or just this may be a very strong disincentive to reporting. Because suddenly your family who is going, well, we might want to report this event, except, then that would not be possible. So it's
so
sorry,
Ian,
go
you're
ahead.
saying I was just going to say so you're saying there's second order effects on this. Not only are people not going to have guns or gun access to certain sports, but now you're talking about not reporting crimes because of the potential impacts on families or communities.
It's actually very common that you'll get people who, who are reluctant to report, especially in the domestic context, because they're concerned about, about the effects that it'll have on their families, right? Because a lot of people in these circumstances don't actually want they're actually looking to maintain the sort of family unit. That's actually very common, because our impressions from what the media gives us of sort of domestic violence situations are always focused on the worst case scenario. And certainly in those worst case scenarios, you want people to get out and so forth. But we see much difference. There's a lot of sort of variety in what happens. And so that can be an issue in that. Domestic also encapsulates, for instance, people who had fights with siblings, fights with parents, that kind of thing as well, which you may not think of as the sort of traditional domestic context. But that's going to potentially have issues, especially because there will probably be a number of people who already dealt with their matters, including like 30 years ago.
Right.
And who got sentences that contemplated that they would continue to own firearms. And then as a result of the sentences they got, they'll be barred from having a firearms license. It's so that's an area of concern. Because of the over-policing of Indigenous communities, this will disproportionately affect Indigenous communities. If the neighbors get called because you have a noise complaint, The police are more inclined to treat this as something that requires sort of police involvement, if depending on sort of skin color. And so you'll see that situations where somebody who looks like me might have been sort of, told, okay, keep it down. The police may have, in other situations, laid charges. That's going to be a bit of an issue on these things. So those sorts of reconsiderations. The Indigenous communities have already expressed concern that these provisions are going to be used against them disproportionately.
Yeah.
And as well as the what they're calling the red flag laws. And these red flag laws are really poorly named, because what they are actually is it's essentially a provision where anybody in Canada can go to a court, what's called ex parte, which means the other side isn't there, doesn't even know it's happening, and doesn't get to present their side of the story. And then that person can go and turn around and ask the court to ban sort of the targeted person from having guns. And so that will then, if that's granted, and of course, it'll often be granted even in situations where it might not be upheld later, because the court doesn't get to hear your side.
Right.
So this could be... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
But a lot of people don't know what ex parte means. Do you want to explain that?
Ex parte means it's done with only one party there. It's in your absence, basically, or in the absence of one of the parties. So they go in without you, if you're the targeted person, they go in without you present, and they ask for this ban. Now, interestingly, École Polytechnique is also opposed to this. Nobody is in support of this except the Liberal Party. And so it's, but they have these ideas of what's best for everybody. And it's going to be a bit of a gong show.
So frankly. we started at the top, Ian, with Kelly asking, what is C21? So let's talk about, where are we at with C21? We're talking about some pretty serious intended and unintended consequences of the bill. So where are we at? And so our viewers can understand that maybe not be following as closely. Where are we at? And then hopefully we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do about it, if there is anything we can do about it.
So right now it has gotten through the House of Commons. It's in the Senate. The Liberal Party has demanded that the Senate go ahead right away to get this through the Senate. The Senate has basically said, no, we're gonna do our thing. We're gonna take some time and consider this, which is a good thing. Now, but there could be all sorts of things, like we don't know what the eventual result is, because the Liberal Party may seek to inject more things back into it through the Senate process. So we might see that. We might see, for instance, and I mean, the best case scenario at this stage is that if they shut down for the summer and this hasn't gone through, then hopefully it gets tossed and they have to start over again. I suspect that might be the game plan. And the reason why I say that is that it might actually be that the goal might be to run an election on this, because gun owners are always sort of easy targets. And so the plan might be to just say, hey, we're going to run an election on this. We're going to say, vote for us, or the scary people get their scary guns. So we'll have to see.
What about, so the House is going to be rising soon. What happens to C21? So it's already gone through the House of Commons. It's at the Senate. Senate, actually, I believe, will be rising at the end of the month. I think it's on the 24th or 23rd-ish. Is it not? So is it dead in the water? Because a lot of lot of time when bills are before the House and they're not completed before the House rises, they're actually dead in the water. But I don't believe this is the case with C-21, is it?
Now that I'm not certain on. I'm not the best on parliamentary procedure.
I don't believe that's the case with us. And I believe you're actually correct. I believe that they're going to be using it as something for an election when it's going to be called. I have a feeling it's going to be called soon.
I mean, they're watching the polls, but I can say, I mean, my local MP, Randy Boissonnault, sent a little newsletter that was saying like, hey, here's an update. And it basically focuses entirely on, here's all the great things we're doing. Now I can tell you, if Randy Boissonnault is taking an interest in his writing, that probably means that they're thinking about an election, because this guy could not care two bits about, his writing unless there's an election in the offing. We just don't see him. We don't hear from him. He's gone until there's an election in the, and so the last time I heard anything from him was when the NDP were making some noise. So I think that they're concerned about a possible election here, or contemplating it, and that's why I'm seeing that.
So can we maybe pivot on that for a moment? If there is an election called, should gun owners be silently celebrating that if we all show up and vote the way of the gun owner, if you will, that maybe this can be overturned or changed or altered in some way?
It'll really depend on who gets into power, right? Because if the Liberals get their majority, then they're going to do all sorts of things that they've wanted to do. Although the NDP hasn't done anything to sort of check the power that they've been seeking. If this bill goes through and the Conservatives get a minority, they won't be able to undo it. Because quite frankly, there isn't another party that'll join in on this. So if this bill goes through and the Conservatives get anything other than a majority, we're still stuck with it. Yeah. And I think there'll be a lot of people who would be disappointed in that case and angry at the Conservatives for like, why didn't you get rid of this? But there would really be nothing that they could do. It's just there wouldn't be any, they wouldn't have any support from other parties to correct it. So that's potentially a problem.
Right. So it sounds like the call to action for gun owners and those people that want to support this being overturned is to encourage a majority Conservative government.
Yeah. And, get out there, vote, volunteer. I'm not a big fan of any party, but the Liberal Party kind of forces me into a camp. It's, that's the problem we've got here is, I'm not sort of a diehard party supporter for any party. In fact, I am sort of deeply cynical about all of them. But the steps they're taking on a number of fronts, not just the gun front, but a number of fronts, mean that I'm, it's sort of an opposition vote on my end.
Vote smart, vote strategically, you're saying, correct?
Yeah. Every once in a while, I see people going, oh, we need to vote for the People's Party. And that is not a good move. That's just a way to, the biggest fans of the People's Party of Canada right now, other than the People's Party themselves, it's the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party would love for them to be a big thing. So, don't sort of fall into that sucker's choice.
So while all of this is happening and we're out there shooting, going to events, etc., a lot of people are saying, is it too late? Can I get my RPAL? Is it too late? Can I still buy a handgun? Okay. Is it too late? So what are the recommendations that these these fine folks what should we be telling them?
So you can still get an RPAL. There's not a huge amount of things to do with an RPAL right now because you can't buy a handgun currently. They've put a freeze on it. Now, if Bill C-21 doesn't go through, that freeze is fairly easily reversible by another government. But if C-21 goes through, that will require a legislative change. So right now you can keep the handguns you've got, and but you can't get any new ones, including through inheritance. So if you've got a relative who's got a whole bunch of handguns, remind them to buckle their seatbelt and to maybe cut back on the bacon, because if they die under the current regime, all of those guns get lost.
Right.
But with an RPAL, you can potentially borrow a handgun. And there's a few situations where a firearm might be restricted currently, that you could, where you could possess it without a license.
One of the things that with an
RPAL rather.
Right. So we also have to recognize that this isn't just, as I said, a handgun ban. This is going to affect hunters. It's going to affect so many other people as well, even people who are potentially interested in taking their sport to the next level. How are we going to find our next Olympic hopeful?
It's Canada's just out. Like that's the thing is, and if you look at the debates, like Pam Damoff was very clear. She considers that not just an acceptable consequence, she considers that a plus. So she basically told was it Linda Keiko, I think it is.
Yep.
The Canadian handgun Olympic shooter, to her face, basically said, "Well, it's a good thing that you're gonna not, that your sport is gonna die." These are people who don't care if Canada is, is seen on the world stage in these sports. They've got their ideology and their goals on that, and it's going to be not the greatest place to be in that sense.
Right. We used to talk about Canadians being disadvantaged because of magazine capacity and competing against other countries where they didn't have the restrictions. The only thing Canadians are good at is mag changes, right? Because we do it so often. But now
I can tell you
restrictions.
Yeah, going to do a 3-gun match in the States. People laugh at me because I end up going and doing a magazine change after 5 rounds. And, that's not how the sport is conducted. So everyone's sitting there going like, well, that's kind of stupid. But, it's hard to compete for this. And keep in mind, at the level where you're trying to compete for the top levels of things, if you're trying to get, the number 1 spot on, a national competition, that extra mag change just destroys you. Like that, there is no room for mistakes. There's no room for an extra half second. So it just takes you completely out of the game and we can't practice for that.
So now with Bill C-21, there's talk of magazine capacity and magazines are part of the conversation. So let's touch on that while we're there, if that's okay.
Well, they haven't put anything in directly as to what the rules are, but they keep hinting at it, and they're going to put it through regulations. So they've added the capacity to change this through regulation. What they basically said is that they want to limit all rifle magazines to 5 rounds, which would, from what we're hearing so far, it's likely to include like tube mags or integral mags, as well as magazines that are currently unaffected, and magazines that in many cases can't be modified, like the Ruger 1022, which is an incredibly popular firearm. You'll find one on just about every farm. Just about every hunter's got one. They're a very common sort of hunting and small game firearm. They use a 10-round magazine that is, because of how it's built, you can't plug it. There's not there's not an ability to do that. So all of these 1022s suddenly become a real issue. They're proposing that the current, so everybody who owns a semi-auto probably has a magazine, because the Canadian market, guns aren't really designed for the Canadian market. Guns are designed for the US market. And so what we get are pinned magazines that have been modified in order to allow, yes, and they will require the showing of a license. But these pinned magazines are modified for the Canadian market by blocking them off such that it can't take more than 5 rounds in the case of center fire semi-autos. They're proposing basically that it's got to be something else that makes it impossible to, change it back. And the problem is impossible to revert it back is in most cases impossible to do. It's just, you're talking, because really, if you're going to put enough effort into it, you can turn just plastic into a magazine that is an overcapacity magazine. This is, 3D printing and so forth. But the, they're saying like, it's got to be impossible. Well, that's just not, that's not a possible thing, right? Because people can modify a magazine in all sorts of ways. So we don't know what that'll look like at this point, but it's likely going to be ugly.
Yeah. Can I ask you about those provinces that are saying that they're going to not go along with C21? So Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, I believe also the Yukon Territory as well has got on board with that.
Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to stop C21 in the sense of like preventing it from going through. Mm-hmm. What they're really saying is we're going to do something about, they want to basically not go along with the buyback plans. And so, worst case, the government might just say, okay, then we're not doing the buyback there. It's still banned and you just get nothing. But that might be politically difficult for the government. But the issues there are, we'll have to see. A lot of these fights come down to funding fights. A lot of the funding fights are just, the provinces don't want to end up having to pay for this big buyback plan. And yes, including tube mags, including integral mags, including all of that.
Yeah. Wow.
So when we were chatting a few days ago on our pre-interview, if you will, we also talked about the impact on historical guns, like one of the popular models, the Lee Enfield. So we should probably touch on that for anybody that's a collector or a fan of those kind of guns. How is this going to affect them, Ian?
Well, the Lee Enfield has a 10-round magazine. And so, the Lee Enfield was sort of exempted from previous magazine limits on a couple of reasons. But, it's, but this is going to mean that people are going to have to take these valuable antiques and start, chopping them up in ways that will destroy their historical or antique value. And the Lee Enfield it's a classic Canadian rifle. It was used by sort of British and Canadian and various other militaries. And because of that, it's actually doubly accepted from the magazine rules, believe it or not. Because the magazine rules note that it's for a semi-automatic firearm other than a semi-automatic handgun. So they were not, the Lee Enfield was not included in the magazine limits because it was a semi-auto. But then it also limited any magazine that was for the Lee Enfield rifle specifically. So, like the original Lee Enfield mags were entirely allowed. There's a bunch of others that are sort of classic Canadian rifles or classic Canadian firearms where they exempted them from the magazine limits. So, for instance, if you look at the Lewis Mark I machine gun, if you have an original drum mag, that's excluded from the magazine capacity limits. This is, of course, not a safety problem because I don't know of any shooting in Canada ever that has been done with a Lewis. Nobody's robbing a liquor store with a Lewis Mark I machine gun. So,
No.
yeah, it just doesn't come up, right?
No.
No.
It's also, I know that C-21, the amendments that they put forward, there was several, as we said, there's the Lee Enfield, but there's several guns on there that it just make you go, but it's not just rifles, it's also shotguns that are on there as well. So it's not a handgun ban. Go ahead.
And one of the other things they're doing is they're resurrecting a committee, which they're going to say is a neutral committee that is going to it's a neutral committee that's going to evaluate which guns should be banned. Well, this neutral, who's going to be on this neutral committee. It's not going to be me. It's not going to be Solomon Friedman or Ed Burlew or any of the big, what they're going to do is they're going to pack it with École Polytechnique and various other anti-gun groups who are whose view is basically everything that exists needs to be banned. And so all of the criticism that they got for including the SKS, the Ruger number 1, like all of these things that the M1 Garand, all of these things are they're gonna seek to ban them. So
right.
And yeah, it would be nice if they knew what they were talking about. What they're going to do is they're going to ban anything that looks scary.
Right. So specifically the SKS.
Oh, the SKS is on their chopping block because it's very popular on reserves. That is just the nature of it. The RCMP does not like the SKS, and it's in large part because it's a popular gun on reserves. But it's a hugely popular hunting rifle, in part because you used to be able to get the gun and a case of ammo for $300. Those days are gone.
Yeah.
But it used to be that you were basically buying the crate of ammo and they were throwing in a gun to go with it. So that meant that a lot of people who were maybe not super wealthy were able to buy these guns and use them to hunt. Which, if you're talking about hunting, to sustain your family because you're sort of, trying to survive, is a great feature. But they also run great in Canadian climates, which is something that not every gun does. The SKS, of course, it's a former Soviet rifle, so it's designed for cold. It'll handle cold just fine, whereas some other guns will weld up and fail in that scenario.
Yeah.
So all these guns that we're talking about and what will be chopped and what may not be chopped in the Bill C-21, a lot of the questions that I get when I'm out and about, we've covered. But one of the ones that I wanted to ask tonight, Ian, was one that was recently asked about tracking. And now that you have to show your license for buying mags, or we may, and then of course ammo and obviously guns. There's been ways to track in the past. There's been mechanisms. So a lot of questions are being asked around that. Is it just restricted, or is it now going to be the prohibited ones? What's being tracked and what's not, and do we know?
Well, I mean, their tracking on all of this is imperfect. And what I mean by that is that they're able to see, for instance, that you bought a gun is going to be reported because you're going to have to, it's going to be disclosed that you bought something at a gun store. Now, the gun store itself has to keep records. And so once they're keeping records, then they can go to that gun store and say, we need to see your records. And you'll have to, everybody at that point will see essentially what was purchased and what wasn't. But if there's private sales, those private sales, all that they get is that a gun was purchased. And so that's going to be a bit more of a headache for them, because you do still have to say, I am buying a gun through this private sale, but they're not necessarily going to know what. But what I suspect they're going to be doing is basically, if they put in sweeping bans, they're going to be sending, threatening letters to everybody who owns, whatever, and basically saying, hey, we'll come after you if, so. And they see you'll have to show your license for parts. That's not the case. It's limited to, that's sort of a little overblown there. But what it is that certain parts you will have to, you will be banned from buying if you've got a firearm prohibition.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. So what do you think that we can do? What can we do as gun owners in Canada to, is there anything we can do?
Make noise, like let people know. It's, you've got to be very sort of active in letting people know. Yeah, there is a provision that the person has to have a license to get firearm parts. The firearm parts, I should specify, only affects currently barrels and slides, I think is the plan. But that's sort of their proposal to crack down on ghost guns. It's not going to have a whole lot of effect, but we'll, yeah. Some people have said, like, do I need this for springs? And the answer to that is no, not for springs. But I mean, let people know. I think a lot of people are gun owners who are sort of not known. There's a lot more women shooting, for instance, whereas the stereotype is that gun ownership is exclusively male. I think that they need to, the public needs to see more of the sort of legitimate, lawful use of this. Contact your senator, contact every senator you can, because, yeah, I don't think the Liberal Party's listening, but let your, if you've got an NDP MP in your area, let them know. Let them know that you are not approving of this. Because the NDP, once upon a time, was the party of workers and farmers, and they like to pretend that they are still. But so maybe they'll listen and say, hey, we're getting a lot of people who are upset by this. I can't make any promises, but it's worth trying.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing, just to parrot it back a bit, is get out there and make noise. Show, especially us women, show our faces. The minority gun owners, the people that are not on the posters or the typical recognized gun owner operator, if you will. And then I think the other big takeaway that you shared with us, Ian, is get out and vote. Get out and vote. And the biggest way we can change the entire situation that the Liberal government has put us in with the help of the NDP is to get a majority Conservative government and ensure that our position on all of these issues is heard. And that's what I've heard from you tonight. Yeah.
And it's really easy to be completely cynical about, nothing will help or anything like that. I know there were a bunch of people who voted PPC because, in the last election, because they were upset that, they were like, we didn't get everything we wanted as promises from O'Toole, and O'Toole backslid on some of the stuff that we wanted. Well, the effect of that has been terrible on gun owners.
Yeah.
Because if we'd had a stronger showing from the CPC in the last election, we would probably not be losing all the things we're losing right now. So that that really screwed us.
So it sounds like you're saying it's not about voting for the individual right now. It's about voting for the position of what I would call gun rights and gun ownership in this country.
I mean, it's never really been about voting for the, people say, oh, I like my individual MP.
Mm.
Well, we have whipped votes in Canada, so your
Yes.
individual MP doesn't actually matter.
No.
They are, in most cases, basically just a warm body in a chair.
Yep.
And, a drinking bird could do the job of most MPs so long as it could vote along party lines. That's really that's how our system works. So, if you don't like the MP, who cares? That's not what it's about at this stage.
You must know my MP.
I mean, I've met enough of them. And the thing is you'll get MPs who will say, oh, well, I'll do what I can, but you understand that we have whipped votes. And it's like, yeah, I understand that you have no spine. And, an MP is never going to, is never going to risk their pension for you.
No.
Right. They don't like you that much.
No.
So, yeah.
So one other takeaway that was touched on earlier, in addition to some of these bigger actions that we've talked about, is that we can still get people out to shoot. So we, the gun owners, we, the license holders, can still bring people out. And those of us that have those great, firearms that currently aren't available for sale, like our pistols, like our revolvers, get people out using them and trying them and introducing them to these sports. And then maybe that will also help the opinions of the people that are on the fence or maybe just misinformed. So I think that's another thing we can all do.
Well, and especially, there's so many people who you take out to go shooting and they're like, oh, I don't know about this. And then when they try it, they're like, that's a lot of fun. Yeah. Why didn't I do this before?
Yeah.
So it can be really helpful in this sort of situation to take out people who might not be people you'd normally think of as gun owners.
Yep.
So I would love for it to be very difficult for the NDP, for instance, to have like a local meeting without somebody standing up and going, but I like guns, right? I would like it to be difficult for the Liberals to have a meeting and not have one of their own party members going, really? Like, leave me alone. That's sort of, I think kind of the ideal situation, is one where there's enough people out there who are familiar with all this. And yeah. So
I think the other thing too is the hunting. I know it's not everybody's interest, but it is. You've touched on sustenance for families and for communities. It is also something that is passed down in families. Some people are second, third, fifth generation hunters, and it's always been, that's the gun owners or the sports shooters and the recreational shooters and the hunters. And I think we all have to recognize we're all one group now. Yeah. And it's really important because a lot of people sat back and said, well, they won't touch hunting guns. They won't go after shotguns. And now we've all been lumped together. So if they see us as one group, we should start seeing ourselves as one group as well. So
that's I wince every time I hear a gun owner saying, oh, well, I don't care about handguns, or I don't care about, those rifles or whatever else, because I can guarantee you, if you don't stand up for, those other guns you don't like, eventually they're going to get to the guns you do like.
Yeah.
And by that point, the sport may have shrunk. All of those people that you were hoping would be there to support you won't be there. Like the there are sport shooters who don't hunt. And if they get out of the hobby because they can't shoot, then when they come for hunting, they don't care anymore. And they're certainly not going to be like, I need to stand up for those people who didn't stand up for me. you got to stand for something, or else nobody's going to care when you fall.
Well, and I think to your point earlier, and one you made as well, Kelly, Canada has got a small gun ownership community as compared to the US. And so they already modify firearms and magazines and capacities so they can sell into Canada. And if we start losing certain sports and activities, the gun industry from the US and other parts of the world, they'll just stop sending stuff because it'll be too much of a pain in the ass to do business with the little amount of business they can do here.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
It's also, they're making it really hard for Canadian businesses to do business here in Canada as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So a lot are moving to the south and they're taking care of business down there. And unfortunately, mass exodus also means that they're making it really hard for us to actually have any type of shooting here in Canada. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on that note, how do we
happy note.
Yeah, on that happy note, how do we keep track of what you're up to, Ian? And how can people find you and support what you're doing for us?
So I'm on YouTube at Runkle of the Bailey. I've got a Patreon and all of that if you want to support. I don't really do much for that right now, so it's pretty much sort of entirely a tip jar kind of thing. I got to figure out sort of a way to do more on that, but it's hard to get all that sort of navigated while also running everything else. But yeah, that's sort of the best way to keep track of sort of what I'm up to there. I'll keep making videos on this, keep talking about it, and we'll see where things go. Right now, I'm kind of buried in the middle of, I've got legal writing that I've got due on the 23rd. So that until that is done, I'm hoping I can get it done by the end of the weekend. Until that's done, my output's going to be a little slow. Because
if people
it's a gun file, I got to fight it.
Absolutely. But you are taking on clients. This is your job. So if people are looking for representation in the areas of gun rights or some such related thing, I am
way busier than I've got any right to be right now. So I am sort of turning people away quite a bit. But that doesn't mean don't reach out, because depending on what's going on. And I'm also being told I have to talk about my nerd channel. So I've got a secondary channel, which is Role of Law, which is entirely for the geek things I do, like role-playing games and so forth.
Yeah.
Because you got to sort of keep that separate, because otherwise YouTube punishes the heck out of you.
I have one last question, and then we'll flip it over, Cal. What is Runkle of the Bailey? I know Runkle's your last name, but of the Bailey, what's that?
So that is a reference to a very old. It's a show that was on the BBC. It's a book series that was about a criminal defense lawyer in the UK, and so the Bailey refers to the Old Bailey. And the character was Rumpole of the Bailey. So
it's a play on words.
It's a play on words there, and it's also kind of a reference to. I had a judge once who got very upset because he thought my name was Rumpole, and he spent a lengthy time telling me how great of a name it was to be Rumpole in the legal profession, and then he was actually kind of pissed when I correct him. My name wasn't Rumpole. He was like, I'm like, oh no.
Well, I think it's great. I'm familiar with that series from BBC, and I was so curious, and that was a personal question I wanted to ask. So thank you for entertaining me on that.
Oh, no worries. It's funny because I either get people saying, "Oh, I love this," or more often they say, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Go on. So one of the things I want to say is go on over to Runkle of the Bailey and go subscribe as well, because that's actually how you're going to stay on YouTube. you've seen
Good point.
you've seen an increase over the last year in subscribers and people who are paying attention to everything that you're doing. I do think that you have one of the highest YouTube viewed videos specific to firearms in Canada, especially when the OIC was announced. People were saying, you need to come out, and then C21, and then you got other things sprinkled in there too, like Amber Heard and all that. So
I mean, I talk about all sorts of I try to do mostly Canadian legal topics, but I talk about things other than firearms as well. And I mean, I just talk about what interests me as a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the thing. Right now, YouTube is like aggressively paring back subscribers. So it's shrinking a little bit, especially because I'm not making videos while I work on these written submissions, but not a whole lot. It's been a weird ride, I gotta say.
So one of the things you shared with us before we went live on our previous chat is that you're an adult onset hunter, Ian. Yeah. So while we've got people listening live and those that watch us on YouTube later, we could just put a shout out that you're looking for some mentored hunting and some hunting partners. So for anybody that wants to hunt with Runkle or the Bailey, reach out.
Yeah.
It's that's actually something I'll tell the hunting community, because you mentioned that a lot of hunting is sort of passed down within families. If hunting isn't able to grow as a thing, then it's it's going to have problems. And if it's not able to expand into new communities and new groups, it's actually really difficult to get into hunting if you're not if that's not how you grew up. So just something for the hunters out there to think about is just outreach is kind of and it's a thorny issue, because of course there's also limited animals, right? So it's always there's that competition aspect. But
I can say for women and youth, there's some really good programs, especially in Alberta and BC, for mentored hunting. But I think men get the short end of the stick, because it's assumed that men will already take men out. And I think that that's not always the case. So we'll put a shout out for getting guys out there. I know I've done some mentored bird hunting with young gentlemen, and especially those that have come to Canada from other countries. They hunted where they came from, and they wanted to learn it here. So it is, I agree with you. It's something that we will lose if we don't continue to encourage new people, and not all families pass it down. And strangely enough, being a young girl with a hunting father, I didn't learn how to do it until I was an adult either, because he assumed because I was a girl I wasn't interested. So
hey, my dad was a hunter and didn't take me hunting, and as a result, it was sort of learning all this later, and that was partially because my mom was not big on guns. And then by the time I was sort of in a place where it was I'm able to be more interested, he'd blown out his knees and couldn't go. So and getting permission to hunt is always a difficult thing, especially if you're sort of new to things, especially because people don't necessarily have trust. It's like, I can tell the difference between a cow and a deer. Like,
I do want to think about it. If we aren't able to hunt and guns are banned, I also want to look at it from another perspective as well. What about the population of deer and other animals that are out there that regularly rely on us to actually go and hunt? What's going to be happening to that? Conservation, animals starving because they're eating each other. There's no animal control whatsoever. So there's always an impact.
What we'll see is what we've seen in a lot of areas where they're like, we're going to bring in people from other countries to, to hunt our animals from helicopters. And it's like, well, couldn't we have just resolved this with like a local season? It gets really strange when they're like, we can't hunt our animals, but like people from the US can come in and shoot them from helicopters. I'm like,
right. Guided hunt tourism becomes a thing, yet the locals can't harvest animals. Yeah.
It's not even guided hunt tourism. It's just like pure slaughter in a lot of these cases.
Yep.
Like just,
Meat's
they're
not
flying,
harvested.
they're not even gathering the meat. They're not gathering pelts or anything. It's just pure culls.
I see. I thought, right. I misunderstood. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. And in many countries where they have an overpopulation, they contract that job out, and you're absolutely right. And all they do is reduce the numbers. There is no management of a harvest. It's just reducing numbers. So it's definitely not what we want to see in Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all the people who are like, oh, I don't like, hunters who waste meat or whatever. Well, as a hunter, I try to use, as much of the animal as I can. I've got hides. I try not to waste anything if I can. Meanwhile, what'll replace it is just pure killing for nothing. That just is just to kill the animal. That annoys me greatly.
Yeah. So that add to the list. I'm back.
You're back.
Yeah. Another unintended consequences impact on conservation and wildlife management, because if hunters are reduced in numbers or firearms are restricted or any of those things we talked about, now we've got a wildlife management problem. We've got conservation. And the money, for a lot of people that don't maybe realize, a lot of the money that is spent by hunters that goes into conservation benefits those people that don't hunt but enjoy the great outdoors. And
for sure. Like if you like Ducks Unlimited, that's a hunting group, right? They want to preserve the outdoors because they like duck hunting.
Right.
And a ton of wilderness conservation and preservation is from hunting groups. And they'll put up money for it. They'll put up, and if you go around and you see like a nice forested plot of land somewhere that is not crown land, it's probably because somebody hunts it. All of these, we're going to lose a lot more than people think.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think we are at the top of the hour here, and I know that we could spin off a couple new shows with a couple of these topics. So I think we should flip it back over to Casey and Rahina. I think some of the questions were mostly answered during the show, but thank you, Ian. It was a great interview. I certainly enjoyed it. Thank you, Kelly. And over to you, Casey. What do we got going on for questions?
Okay, so we have, sorry, I'm just scrolling back up so that I can find where I highlighted them. So the first one is from Iris in Texas, or TX. She wanted to know if there was any way to change our Constitution to a Second Amendment like the US. Could solve some issues.
Our Constitution, like they put in an amending formula for it, and the amending formula is basically impossible. It's essentially impossible to change the Canadian. I mean, I say essentially impossible. It's theoretically possible, but in actual practice, it's just not going to happen. And there wouldn't be the there just wouldn't be the support for it here in Canada.
Okay, and then the next one was from Derek Butts, and he's asking, can the CCFR legal case have any impact on C21 if it comes back favorably?
It wouldn't actually impact C21, and some of the elements of C21 might be sort of a response to some of the court cases that are currently ongoing. So they're basically trying to use C21 to cover some of the weaknesses of their current court issues.
Mm-hmm.
So unfortunately, C20 or the CCFR case is just limiting them on that OIC.
Okay, and I think that's it for the questions that I've gotten so far. Nope, they're not questions, so they're just comments.
Yeah, and that's true.
There were so many great comments tonight,
Yep.
and it was
Yeah.
outstanding to see somebody joining us from Texas. So it was great to see the interaction. Thank you so much, Ian, for answering a bunch of those while they were coming up on screen.
Yeah, you did a great job of answering as people were coming up along.
Yeah.
Making
Thank you.
comments.
Yeah, I've may have sort of had to do the same thing with the YouTube channel before of like
Yeah.
responding to comments as they come up. Thank you guys. It's really important that that programs like this exist and groups exist, because it's really easy for people to sort of get a stereotype of what a gun owner looks like, and I don't think that those stereotypes have been really true for a long time. When I go and look at the range, just about every time I've gone to the range lately, there have been men and women shooting. So it's good to have that visibility as well.
So I think, Regina, you got some stuff to give away and some sponsors to thank before we close off tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. So you dropped off earlier, so I couldn't confirm with you. Do we still have She Shoots t-shirts to give away?
We sure do.
Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead and give out one of those, Casey.
Okay, so our first winner is 1AB.
Hey, congratulations.
Awesome.
I'm pretty sure they've won before too. So.
Yes, I have their email. I will contact them.
Okay, perfect. Okay, and then our second prize for today's evening will be a Canada First Ammo prize pack.
Nice.
And that is Rainman YYC.
Hey, congratulations.
I still have some CUSIF swag, so we can do a CUSIF prize pack too.
Sure, let's go ahead and do it.
Throw a wrench in my thing. Now I gotta do this.
One more.
Still one more time, Casey.
All right. So this one is Tim Everett.
Nice.
Hey.
Congrats, Tim.
Yeah, congratulations to all our winners today. Let's just quickly move on to upcoming events. So
hold on
for
one
the
second, Regina. Just because everybody is on YouTube and I can't send emails through YouTube, I'll just get everybody who won today to send me an email just to say hey, and then we'll do the address and where we'll mail everything to. So.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thanks, Casey. Okay, yeah. So upcoming events. So for this USF, as I mentioned, forever ago now, this USF is looking for volunteers. So if you're interested, please send us a brief email at submissions@cusf.ca. So we're mainly looking for volunteers with experience in establishing or managing student sports shooting clubs, customer relationship management, web hosting, and graphic design and video editing. Also, if you're a student at a university that doesn't currently have a gun club and you're interested in creating your own gun club, also send us an email at submissions@cusf.ca and we'll help you get it started and get going with that. And that's it for CUSFs. Kelly, Maple Seed.
I will give you an update on Maple Seed, but before I do, I wanted to say thank you so much, Ian, for coming on tonight and all the information that you shared. And as I said, it was great to meet you finally in person on this past weekend. But again, tonight was really great to hear so much about C21 and all of the experience that you have. So thank you again for coming on.
Great
Thank you.
point. Yeah.
And hopefully it'll happen again, but I got to do another Maple Seed because
Yeah, yeah.
that was a lot of fun, and I didn't quite get the patch, so I got to try again.
Okay. Well, with Maple Seed, we do have a lot of events that are happening all across the country. You can log on to mapleseedrifleman.com, go to the event section. There is a ton of events that are listed there. There's a lot that have been sold out, but there also are events that still have spots available. You might have to drive around to them. But check those out. We have more events being added all the time as well. And again, we're regionally run. So if you're in the BC area our province. Check out the BC events. If you have events that you're looking for and maybe we don't have anything that's listed, send us an email at info@mapleseedrifleman.com. And we will, or even just going onto the website, and there's a little box there that you can click on and send us a message. I'll get that and I'll send you out an email reply, or I'll put you in contact with somebody who can give you the information that you're looking for. But yeah, we have a lot of events that are happening. We also have CUSIP events that are going to be taking place in the fall once school's back in session too. So keep an eye out for that. All right. Deneen, what about you with Lady Guns?
Well, it's embarrassing because Lady Guns hasn't put on any events because we've been busy having fun at other people's events. So went out.
I know, right?
Supporting teaching kids how to shoot shotguns a couple of weeks ago. This weekend at Silver Willow in Carstairs in Southern Alberta, I will be once again volunteering with the ladies Learn to Shoot. Wednesday nights we have shotgun and skeet at Ahia. There's a ladies only black badge coming up in Lethbridge that I'm going to get down to. And then Casey and I were just talking about what kind of trouble we can get in when I go spend some time in Kamloops. So I'm loving getting out and shooting with a bunch of the gals that I've had at our classes, and I have the desire to get back out and put them on. But when we put them on, we don't get to go out and have fun. So we're trying to balance it a little bit. So I apologize to those for not getting the ladies' nights up and running again, but we will be doing that. So,
okay.
Kelly, you were going to say?
Yeah, I do have a quick question. Any more plans for you to be in the Calgary Stampede Parade in a bathtub? That's it.
Yes, yes. Before I address the Stampede Parade, I will say, and I've also been invited to be an instructor in training with Maple Seed, and I probably should get off my backside and do something about that. So. There you go. So, yes, Calgary Stampede Parade. I happen to have a meeting with Black Bart tomorrow to discuss our matching long underwear for the Stampede Parade float. So, yes.
I didn't get signed up to do fireworks for the Stampede, which is now making me sad.
Well, if you're in town, Ian, let me know, and we'll go to the gun range and make our own fireworks.
There you go.
Sounds good.
There you go.
And, I'll just interject here. 1AB has said that because he's already won, would like to donate. So I ran the number generator one more time, and this time it is Iris in Texas.
Excellent.
Wow.
Nice.
Again, I'll get you to send a note to me at casey@ladyguns.ca, and then we'll get your address and your size, and we'll send that stuff off to you, okay?
T-shirt heading south.
Perfect. Nice. Congrats. Okay, so since we got all the important stuff out of the way, thank you so much, Ian, for joining us today. We'll see if we can have you again another time. It was definitely an interesting conversation. Mm-hmm. So I'll once again thank our sponsors. So Cabela's Canada Outdoor Fund, Savage Arms, Beretta, Vortex, and Canada First Ammo. If you like today's episode, please leave us a like and follow us so that you don't miss out on any of our episodes. You can watch us on YouTube and Facebook, or you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. If you liked our message and would like to learn more about our programs, check out our websites at cusf.ca, ladyguns.ca, and mapleseedrifleman.com. To support us and get some additional perks, check out our membership programs. Thank you all for tuning into the She Shoot Podcast, episode 17, Ian Runkle. Make sure to join us on July 11th for episode 18. Episode theme, topic, and guests will be announced on our social media. So make sure to follow us for all the She Shoots updates. Thank you, and good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.